Hello, welcome to Shaman Sister Sessions. This is episode 93, and we are talking about entities, attachments, and psychic attacks. Do you have one? What are the signs? What are the symptoms, and what you should do? I'm Katherine Bird, and I'm here with my shaman sister, Michelle Hawk, and we are excited to get into this. This is the second video or episode in a little two-part mini-series. The last one was on entities and psychic attacks and why you don't have one and why you're not being attacked. So that one was full of a lot of very valuable information. So we welcome you. Please, please, please go back and watch that one or listen to that one, because you're going to get a lot of information about different ways that we can believe that we have entities or attachments, and what that process is like, and how we might be going wrong. And but this episode, we're going to talk about, what if you do have an entity, an attachment, or you are being psychically attacked? How do you know, and what do you do? Hi, Michelle.
Hi. Hello. And I would actually steer you to, if you haven't seen the other episode, and it was episode 92, so the one right before this. If you haven't tuned into that one yet, pause this one right now and go back and tune into that other one first, because there are also a lot of things that we talked about in the other one that we're not going to get as deep into here. And so please, again, the likelihood of you not having an entity and not being attacked is actually far higher. So if you've already tuned into that one and you're curious, or maybe you do think, well, actually, I really do think I do have an entity, or you are just simply curious, then feel free to launch into this episode as well. So, hi. Yay. So this is for the much smaller percentage of the people who contact us, or the people that we interface with, who do have entities or attachments, or who are under psychic attack. And so Kat was kind of mentioning last time some of the things that we're classifying as entities and attachments. That feels a good place to start, looking at, well, what are we actually talking about? And in terms of entities or attachments, again, we're working with non-corporeal beings, so non-embodied beings or energy frequencies that can belong to all sorts of different categories and all sorts of, all over the energetic spectrum. And they can be, quote, good or not good, or somewhere in between. They can be, well-intended energies. They can be bad intended energies. They can be benign, right? We can have entities or attachments that aren't actively harming us, or like, like a little skin tag on your dog, like it's no big deal and you can tell it's there, but it's not actually causing harm. Or we can have very harmful entities and attachments. So just keep in mind, whenever we're working with this, or whenever we're talking about this topic, we could be anywhere on those spectrums.
Right. And so let's talk about some of the maybe signs and symptoms. Can we start there? Because I feel like there's so much to say, but we just said a lot of it. So I don't want to just totally repeat everything we just said in the last episode. Rather that you go back and listen to that one. So can we start there? Can we start with some signs and symptoms and some things that we might want to know about, like if we might have this kind of issue, what we might be dealing with?
Yes. So some of the signs and symptoms, let's kind of keep in mind that if you did have an entity or an attachment, there would very likely be indicators on all the different levels of being. So when I say that, we'd be looking at, there would likely have a physical manifestation, an emotional manifestation, an intellectual or mental manifestation, and a spiritual manifestation. So keeping in mind that, and the level of all of those would be different according to the way in which the entity or attachment was affecting you, and how long it had been there, and all sorts of things. But it is very likely.
And why it showed up, and initially, like why it is there, what its initial intention was in your life, how much engagement you've had with it, how much further energy you have been feeding it. We can grow these energies from little wispy beings into things that have a lot of power by feeding them and giving them our power. So so it's a really big topic. Let's just say that first and foremost. Like, we're probably not going to hit on every single possibility or every single manifestation, every single circumstance that this might be true, but we're going to try to help you out with some ideas of what might be going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but suffice it to say that we would likely see effects on all areas of being in some way. And, you know, that can range, for example, physical effects. It could range from the very mild, meaning like you have slightly less energy, or you just feel a little bit tired, or you develop, develop some sort of skin condition, right? Like, you know, you have breakouts erupting out when you normally don't have any skin challenges, to all the way on the very severe end of the spectrum, having very serious diseases pop up, or having, very serious physical conditions, or
parasites often, can go hand in hand with other kinds of energetic attachments. So bizarre illnesses sometimes can, and just if you have a bizarre illness, if you have something that's really weird, that absolutely does not mean you have an entity or an attachment, might not have anything to do with it.
Right. When we're looking at these indicators, it's not any one of these things. It would be like all or many of them. Mm-hmm. So please keep in mind, if you're hearing this and saying, oh my God, I have a parasite, I must have an entity, probably not. Right?
Right. Please do not use this information to create a story that creates an identity that creates something that is harmful and, non-life affirming within your life. That is not what this information is about. Please do not warp our words to, beat yourself up into some sort of frenzy about your entity. Even if you have an entity, even if it is a super crazy, massive, powerful thing, you are actually okay. You will be fine. You'll get the support you need, and everything is going to be okay. All right. So don't feed it with your fear and your, anxiety about this. That's the number one thing. And we'll keep coming back to that. Don't feed this thing with your fear. Mm-hmm. So that's on the physical plane. But so we could talk about like physical health and well-being, but also on the physical plane, sort of like really bad luck, like consistent, chronic things happening in the physical environment that you just cannot explain why you keep having like certain things just over and over and over again are occurring. Lots of, maybe falls but then you fell again, and then you fell again. And that also doesn't mean you necessarily have an entity, but this could be one of the myriad of signs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And looking at more manifestations like bad luck or repeat patterns on the 3D level. This can show up in accidents, right? Physical accidents, or in financial challenges. We can see this if it seems like, you can't really hold on to money, or all of a sudden there are all these repeat financial catastrophes that happen to you, whether it's in your relationship somehow, in the people who are coming into your life, having this weird pattern, or having something show up in the way that you're spending your time or career, or continuing to lose your job, or can't show up any place on time, right? There are so many manifestations. And again, not any one of these means you have an entity, but if you have like all of these happening, it is more likely. Mm-hmm. So 3D, yeah. So 3D
yeah. And then also like addiction patterns can also be a sign that there is something that is influencing and siphoning energy when you're engaging with addictions.
Mm-hmm. And this is addictive substances, but also
anything,
Yeah.
Shopping, sex, gambling, pretty much, we're humans. So anything you can be addicted to, which is pretty much everything, could have some sort of energy attached to that addiction that is utilizing your physical body to receive the energy of engaging with that addiction, even though it's, it needs a physical form to engage with the addiction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's another really good one. And there's probably more too on the 3D level, but looking at the mental level, the mental and emotional level, repetitive thought patterns, right? Particularly around destructive belief systems or limiting belief patterns. And it's almost like there's someone sitting in the back of your brain just like chanting this stuff at you. That might be an indicator if
Mm-hmm.
if really hard to shift a belief pattern or a thought pattern, as well as emotional patterning and seeming like there's this one pattern that seems to show up in every single one of your relationships, no matter how you try to work with it or how you try to do things differently. Having other mental emotional ones.
I don't know. I will probably think of more as we go along.
Yeah.
That there are, like highly volatile, being like unable to control your emotional state. So there's a lot of intense volatility happening, like lashing out at people, feeling like when you're in an emotional state that you are completely maybe out of control of the situation, that you don't like, and that can feel like in other areas of your life where maybe you feel like, I almost have forgotten what happened inside that experience. I'm unable to control myself, and I'm unable to be able to be aware and conscious inside of an experience that I'm having. Now, that might also be trauma, and that might also be your own need to work on a lot of stuff. So go back to the last episode. Don't just blame an entity. This is like, we're looking at all these things coming together.
Yeah. Cannot emphasize that enough. Okay. And if you're in the, 1 or 2% of people who actually does have an entity or attachment, okay, this is for you. And to that, I would add almost the feeling as though, again, like you're not in control, but almost as though some unknown part is making decisions for you.
Right.
Right.
Like overwhelming, like a particular emotion or a particular thought that's coming in, because these entities, and they're not necessarily, it might not even be like a demon, right? It might be that someone who passed, who you were really attached to, just never really left, and they're hanging out, and their emotional residue is sort of influencing you because you're a really sensitive person. And so your sensitivity to this kind of energetic emotional residue that's hanging out with you is feedback looping on this, which would also be considered an attachment.
Yes. And again, remembering all attachments and entities are not bad. There might be some that are, again, benign, or at very least not actively seeking to cause you harm. And in some circumstances might actually be well-intentioned energies that are for some reason in your body or your field. I would say also sudden changes in your physiology or your heart, mind, or your energy body. Right. If
completely out of character experiences that start all of the sudden.
Right. Whether it's on the physical or mental, emotional, or energetic level, if you are really consistently this way, and then all of a sudden your behavior changes, your body exhibits some changes, you start having different physical symptomology, that's a good indicator that there is some really dramatic shift in your energy, whether it be some shift that has happened for you because you cleared a blockage or whatever, or it's because there's another energy influencing your field. And we've seen that there's actually medically documented cases, for example, where someone receives an organ transplant, and all of a sudden they start taking from someone who has died in an accident, and all of a sudden they start taking on characteristics of the person whose organ they received. And of course, the medical papers that look at this, they're saying, okay, well, what's happening on the cellular level? But we could also take that a step further and say, well, what's happening on the energetic level? And are they somehow housing an attachment from this soul that left their body in an accident, and now they have this really direct connection because they received an organ transplant, right? There are documented cases of this.
Right. Or even in homes. So you might move into a house, and maybe there's something there, and something's been living there before you got there, and you're super sensitive, or your kid or something like that is just being influenced. Another physical one that can be like really disordered eating. what do you think, body dysmorphia, where it's almost like there's a voice that's telling you to do something that's harmful to you, cutting, like telling you to hurt yourself, or that, you know, kind of these things can be a real entity.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then looking on the energetic level, working more on the etheric plane, looking at, can you scan your energy body and find energetic components that don't belong to you, right? Are you looking in your energy centers, in the meridians, in the different components of the energetic anatomy? And are you able to have full access to your full energy body? Are there parts that you don't have access to? Do you, and here's the other thing, right? Like it might be that we can't really identify an entity, or it might be that it's like, well, I don't really sense anything there, where, you know, it's kind of hiding, right? Like it's sort of got a shield up and we can't really tune into it. But paying attention to, are there areas in your body or your energy field that you don't have access to? That's an indicator that something might be there that's not supposed to be there, or otherwise blocking your perception.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a good one, but I can't I can't remember it now. What else you got?
Well, so looking at your feet again, scanning, and so obviously, I'm hoping this is really obvious here. One of the most important things that you can do to figure out if you have an entity or not is to cultivate your energetic and body awareness to the point where you are able to distinguish, is there anything in your field that doesn't belong to you? And here's where, again, as we talked about extensively in the last episode, the vast majority of what you would be sensing in your field is yours, right? So it does take a degree of perception to be able to discern, okay, well, here's this uncomfortable frequency. Is it uncomfortable to me because it's part of my pain body that I haven't really addressed or interfaced with before? Or is it uncomfortable to me because it's actually a foreign frequency that is in my field and causing me harm? So being able to tune into your own energy body and also noticing if there's gaps. Lost time would be another indicator. We kind of mentioned that or we didn't actually say lost time, but we talked about if it feels like there's someone else making the decisions, or you can't really explain your behavior, or if you actually lose time, that could be an entity indicator.
Right. Like radical shifts in personality. Mm-hmm. And yeah, just like, I mean, you know, we're all changing, evolving, growing beings, but if you're growing in the wrong direction, there's something to look at. And also when we say attachments, like we can also, we are highly attachable, right? In some ways, right? We attach to our parents, we attach to our siblings, we attach to our friends, we attach to our loved ones, we attach to partners. Like we have all of these sort of, you know, attachment points that we energetically are connecting to others to be able to give and receive energetic and emotional information. And so there are times when maybe that attachment is, you know, a thought, a belief pattern that's been passed down through the family. And now, even though maybe it's like grown because throughout time, people have believed it so much and given so much credence and so much belief and so much thought to it and so much power and energy and life force to it, that it's almost like it creates its own little energy body. It creates its own little being. And then it's like, oh, well, I go along with this family because it's going to feed me. And it's like, I'll just sit here on your shoulder and tell you this belief about yourself. And then you keep feeding the belief and it keeps being with you. Mm-hmm. And so we'll talk a little bit later about like different ways that we can work with moving, you know, removing these energies and stuff. But that can also be what could be called an attachment, which, you know, isn't necessarily like, oh, this is a demon that, you know, comes from hell. Our concept of
identity,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And yet there is this very strong energy that didn't maybe start with you, right? It didn't necessarily start with you, but it is being perpetuated throughout time by being connected to you.
Yeah. How about as long as we're on kind of symptomology, because I think next we're going to shift, well, how does this come about? Like, how do we get entities and attachments? Before we do that, how about we touch upon psychic attacks? Like, what are some symptoms that you are under psychic attack?
A lot of the same symptoms, so it's kind of confusing. So a lot of just like tiredness, brain fog, not being able to like place yourself. Um, illness, random illness, strange, coincidental accidents, things like that. Really, bad luck, very extreme bad luck things. That could be a thing. And again, go back to last episode. You're probably not under psychic attack.
Probably not, but just in case you are, tune in here. I would also say maybe like implanting different ideas, right? And we talked about in the symptoms of an entity or attachment, like having repetitive thought patterns or beliefs. But I know in psychic attack, it is possible to like implant and encode different thought patterns that feel like your own. So if all of a sudden you're developing like this weird belief structure or thought pattern, then in conjunction with a lot of these other symptoms, not just by itself, then know that that's a component of that too.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the same. For all intents and purposes, a lot of what we'll be talking about as far as this aspect of things go, there will be crossover and commonalities.
Yeah. Trying to think if there's anything else, any other like symptoms, things that we could be looking out for.
Yeah.
We
might think of
like a lot of sabotage, a lot of sabotage of relationships, like sabotage of the things that you actually want to happen in your life, and maybe even witnessing your own sabotaging the thing, and then just like not being able to figure out what the pathway through that sabotage pattern is. Mm-hmm. Could be a possibility, often in conjunction with all these other things.
Yes. Again, in conjunction, not isolated by itself. So let's look at how do we pick up entities and attachments, and how do we get to be under psychic attack? And Kat, you were starting to go there a little bit, looking at, okay, this cultivated ancestral attachment, right? But let's look at how does that come about, and how is it possible? So some of the things, I'll just throw out some of the ones that we've mentioned so far. Moving into a place that has an entity that inhabits there, having something cultivated ancestrally or karmically, and being under psychic attack with someone or something. So someone actively targeting you.
A human targeting you. Right.
Well, a human, but a psychic attack also can take place from a non-corporeal entity. So let's keep that in mind. But yeah, someone or something. So a physically embodied human or some energy. But how does that even come about in the first place? Like, does everyone who moves into a haunted house, a quote haunted house, get an attachment? No. And why is that?
Well, strangely enough, and especially now that, they've been able to track, like they can track through, numbers of people moving into a space. And there'll be people who are like, fine, 20 years later, fine. And then somebody will move into that house, and then all of a sudden it'll go back to this same story of the, the haunting and the entity and the whatever from 50 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so some of us are more sensitive. We are more psychically attuned. We're more open. We're more available for these things to influence us. And we're more sensitive. And it can, some people are just more robust, and they're not open. They're not available to these planes as much.
Yes. And let's remember from our last episode, we talked about this weird like specialness identity. So, don't be flattered if, I'm the sensitive one, so I got an entity when none of my housemates did, or none of my did.
It might just be toxic mold. So like check that shit first.
Right. It might be toxic mold. But like, okay, you might actually have an entity, but it's not a weird compliment. So I know you might be thinking, what the fuck, Michelle? I'm not taking it that way. But if we've seen this, right? Like we're not making this up, where we have seen people get into this weird sort of like identifying with their capacity to have entities because they are so sensitive or they are so psychically open. But I would say, again, not all sensitive and psychically open people are more susceptible to attracting entities, because let's remember, there must be some part of you that is agreeing to that experience in order for that to happen. Right. And that's one of the biggest pieces,
And
sovereignty,
often, sovereignty, like you have free will, and there's often a part of us that's agreeing to an experience because it's the way that we're going to learn, grow, and change ourselves. And so if we focus on the experience over everything else and forget about, well, why did this happen? Is there something within me that's looking to learn and grow and become to mastery? Then we miss the point. We don't actually change. We don't actually grow. And that's what we keep coming back to. Whether you have an entity or don't have an entity and you're having an experience that seems like an entity, it is always there as an opportunity to teach you more about yourself, about your energy body, about your trauma, about your belief systems, about how you are sovereign, about your ability to engage with the spiritual realms in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but there was some part of you that agreed to this experience, and again, looking at okay, why did this agreement take place? Kat mentioned for the purpose of mastery. So we could agree to something as part of a soul contract of, all right, for my growth and development in this lifetime, I am agreeing to come into contact with this level of engagement and attachment for the purpose of my own development and mastery. We could have karmic agreements with ancestral energies of, okay, I am agreeing to embody this karmic attachment for the purpose of liberation of all of my ancestors, right? That could be an agreement here too. We could, again, using the example of maybe a loved one who passed on, or using the example of, let's remember here, not all attachments are, quote, bad, right? There could actually be some attachments or some entities that might be benevolent or might be somehow coming into agreement with someone, aka you, with a physical body here on the earth plane for the purpose of bringing their energy through to a 3D experience, right? So that could be part of an agreement too. And there's plenty of examples of people out in the world who have attachments that are not harmful, that are actually here in some way to participate in an earthly experience, even though they don't have a body. So that could be another form of agreement, or that would perpetuate or would create an attachment.
Right. And so from there, I would say to go back and look at our episodes on mediumship. We have lots of episodes on channeling. And so if you are a medium or a channel and you're not aware of that, you might be picking up on entities, right? Beings that are looking to communicate with you or through you, and you just don't have the skill set yet. You don't have the tool set yet to understand how to work with that in an effective, healthy way. So we've got lots of episodes on channeling and on mediumship. We have a really good one on mediumship from way back in the day. So go back and watch those too.
Yeah, absolutely. And then another form of agreement that could take place would be, and this is kind of related to the mediumship stuff, would be charity work. So if you are a highly sensitive person, you are empathic, you are psychically sensitive, and you become sort of a safe place for non-corporeal energies who, either souls who haven't crossed over, or energies that are stuck or are in trauma, you become kind of a safe place for them to grab onto in order to receive healing. And whether you are consciously aware that you're processing their energy through your system or not, that could be another form of agreement, because you've stepped forward in some sort of service contract, charity work contract to support non-corporeal energy and moving through your system for the purpose of healing.
Right. And again, if that's the case, that's where you get to step into your mastery, because you might be drawn to, designed for doing a certain kind of healing spiritual work that you just, at this point, you don't have the awareness and the tool set to be able to do it in a way that's really great. So the encouragement there is to be like, okay, well, if I wasn't looking at this from a fear space, if I wasn't looking at it from that level, and I was looking at it as to what this could be signaling within me for my own growth, and maybe maybe this is something that I'm going to do. Maybe something that I want to participate in is helping these beings to move to the other side. And I need to not be attached to them as my entity so that I'm holding on to them, but learning how to help them move through. Then that might be part of your work that you need to get trained in, instead of sort of, being that safe space where nothing ever leaves.
Right. And there is a healthy way. And in this regard, in particular, the last two that I mentioned about the different types of agreements, again, please refer back to the mediumship and channeling episodes where we talk about it is possible to work with these high vibration energies that might come originally to us in the form of an attachment or an entity. It is possible to work with them as discrete beings where we're not actually incorporating them. We're not actually taking them into our own personal identity and makeup, but instead engaging with them in a way that's a lot healthier and more supportive of our health, of our well-being and sovereignty. So it is totally doable. And I would also say, and Kat's mentioned a couple of times, and I think it's worth repeating. What?
Your sound got a little garbly for me. I don't know if for everybody else. So just repeat that just in case.
Which part? Just the last part?
The last sentence.
The last sentence. Kat has mentioned around, I got a little thrown off. Around the idea of these, quote, demons coming in as our teachers, right? That's, again, it's part of the agreement of looking at, it's not necessarily that again, quote, fixing the problem doesn't necessarily mean no longer engaging with these energies. It might actually mean simply shifting it out of an embodied relationship, meaning shifting it out of your energy field and then engaging with it as a discrete entity. So solving the problem might not look like an exorcism. It might not look like helping beings cross over. It might not look like cutting the thing out or clearing the contracts. It might look like that. It might look like you don't need to engage with this. It needs to go. But it might actually look like, hey, this is beneficial if done in a different way. So keep that in mind too, that again, this teacher might be really present and important for you to have in your life, just not as a part of your energetic makeup.
Right. And yeah, another way that we can take on entities is actually through in just inviting them in. And a lot of times in medicine work, or, we're in a very open, psychically open space, or we're doing psychedelics and, drugs, alcohol, like all of these things that open all of those things open you up. And so good time, good place is just beyond important to stress, is that if you're like, really think before you dose out at some party or whatever. Like, really think before you engage in medicine work about who you're sitting with and the place that you're in. Really think about that, because there is a certain amount of just openness and protection that's just not there anymore. And you can engage with beings that you on some level invite into you. And so I have heard some of the people who I've seen have really bad attachments with very strong beings, were people who were doing medicine work and having these engagements with beings who maybe they thought were angels or were usually offering something. So if a being comes in and is like, oh, and wants to have sex with you, just say no. If a being comes in and is like, oh, you're the most powerful, you're the next Jesus, or you're gonna be a billionaire, or I'm gonna give you all of this stuff, or let's, like any kind of like give or take that's gonna take place, like you're gonna be inviting that being into you in some sort of way and allowing them to attach to you by your desire. If your desire is being provoked, step back and know that nothing good is going to come of that. Nothing's good of your desire being provoked to be the best, the most, to have these things within yourself. Anything that you are not sourcing from yourself, that you're trying to get from another being, and that can be anything: spiritual development, sexual mastery, like anything that some outside force could be offering you that you're not sourcing from yourself, that's a recipe for creating an attachment that could be very detrimental to your life.
Mm-hmm. And this codependency, right? And this is where we see people that, and I've referenced a couple times this weird identity, like this special identity. And a lot of times we look at, well, why, once a person has realized that they have an entity, and why does it stick around, or why aren't they trying to get rid of it? And in our last episode, Kat and I talked about the number of people who reach out to us thinking they have entities or have attachments that then choose to not follow up and not do the work and not release it or clear it. There is looking at, well, what are we actually getting out of keeping that frequency around? And this is a really good example of it might be feeding some part of us. It might be feeding our ego, or we're somehow ascribing this entity or attachment with a benefit that we're receiving on some level. So it means that, okay, we possible benefits, we get to be a victim. We get to have some increased sense of control over others. We get to engage in unhealthy behavior that's super feeding and fulfilling to some shadow part of ourselves. We get to let our shadow have a lot of energy and life force. We get to engage in really kind of unhealthy, but super like fulfilling on a very shadowy level, like gossip or unhealthy thought patterns, or not forgiving someone and being in self-righteousness, right? So there are a lot of shadow benefits that we actually could be receiving from continuing to engage with entities and attachments that would then encourage that shadow part of ourselves to not seek out processing and releasing those beings.
And it's really important to remember that like entities and beings, like they can get into your psychic center and they can create any kind of show, right? They can create all the lights and colors and things that you're seeing and all of this stuff that could be very engaging. And you want to engage with it because it makes you special. And it makes like, oh, I've got this, special connection that I can do all these things psychically. And which is why it's important, like whatever psychic stuff you're getting or whatever stuff you're seeing or these things, to really not have attachment to them, because that attachment, you having attachment, desire, want, need, like that energy, that opens you up to someone. It's just like in the real world, right? It opens you up to someone taking advantage of you. If you're the guy who's like, oh yeah, I could get $1 million if I send this guy $300, like he's going to drop it in my bank account. Like that makes sense to me because I have this greed that I think I'm going to, win one over on the system. Like that's what opens you up to con men. And so you can kind of just see that some entities are just kind of like con men, right? They're going to trick you so that they can get something from you. Only what they're getting from you is your attention and your life force. They're keeping you from your spiritual path. They're keeping you from your further evolution and growth, which is what hopefully you're actually after, is evolution and growth.
Mm-hmm. Good point. And if you're tuning into this, I mean, that's probably fair to say, right? So if you've reached this point, again, in all likelihood, you don't actually have an entity or attachment and no one is attacking you. See previous episode. But in the rare possibility that you do, some things that we would recommend you pay attention to, or you move toward. Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I have one more way. I have one more way that we can open ourselves is, there's two more actually. So a place that some people actually get entities is when they have extreme trauma. So like in really bad car wrecks, things where if you ever have been in an experience where you felt yourself leave your body, so trauma, childhood trauma, sexual abuse is actually quite common that you can pick something up because you are dissociating and leaving your body. So you're leaving it open for other energies to come in. And if someone's abusing you, for example, there might be negative energy entities that are in the space that are feeding off the energy of abuse. So usually addiction, right? And these things that are there in that space. So it is a place where stuff can come in. And also surgeries, places where you're not capable of being in your body. So, which is why it's really important to be in your body. So that's another place. And then one more is that within that space, sometimes, especially in childhood, if you're going through something really rough, if you are experiencing abuse or neglect, and you feel powerless, you feel hopeless, you might invite in some sort of energy to support you. So you might invite in an angel sort of a being. You might invite in, a bear. You might invite something in that is a being, an energy, or something that you're like, I'm really scared. I'm really powerless. I'm really helpless. Help me, help me, help me, help me, help me. And I've seen where quite often that it's like you invited something in and it's there to be helpful because it gives you power. And then over time, just like a lot of things that we develop as children as our coping mechanisms and our tools, instead of it being helpful, it then starts to become something that's a detriment because it means that there's less of your pure whole life force inside of your system in your body. So sometimes that needs to be dealt with. And it's not like, oh, I need to go in there and rip it out. Often it's a conversation of like, hey, that was really awesome that you showed up for me. I'm really, really grateful. I actually don't need you anymore. I'm really safe. You can go help another little kid.
Mm-hmm. That's a super great point. And I want to add on to that. It doesn't necessarily only take place in childhood. So that's a really great example, but we've all been through trying circumstances and imagine asking for help or calling upon your ancestors or somehow invoking or inviting in an energy to be present with you. And if that energy continues to stick around, what can happen is, we become used to it or think that we need it. We become dependent on it, or we can form this kind of unhealthy codependent dynamic with an energy or an entity. And that might not be appropriate. So again, keeping in mind, it's not all necessarily bad stuff. There can actually be healthy and helpful energies that, or I should say helpful or benevolent energies that we invite into our fields where the dynamic eventually becomes unhelpful and unhealthy.
Right.
So keep that in mind too.
Yep. And if, when we're looking at working with beings and invoking beings and channeling and mediumship and all of these things, like, that's fine. That's something that's totally okay to do, right? But if you know what you're doing, so learn how to do it. Open your channel will happen in 2020. So show up and do that course. But at the same time, because it's very important that you're also training into your system your ability to feel and own your own wholeness, your own sovereignty, your own ability to take up all the space in your body and in your field, so that if you are working with something or you're calling something in for protection at some point, or something, is really intense, like, yes, great. But then you're able to go back to what is my wholeness? What is my full embodiment of myself? Because from that place, that's where we really get to know ourselves. And that's where we get to come into real alignment with what is really, really our authentic expression.
Yeah, absolutely. So are we ready now to shift gears?
I think we're ready.
Yeah, that was great. And I would like to just segue from what you said of knowing ourselves being really one of the primary components of dealing with if we do have an entity or an attachment or there is some realm of psychic attack. Your self-awareness and self-knowledge of your own body, your own energy field, your own identity, your own sense of wholeness is going to be the primary most important factor in being able to navigate this situation in a healthy and grounded way. So the stronger relationship you have with your own frequency, your own body, your own identity, the easier it will be for you to move this energy in a healthy direction.
Yeah. Okay. What's next?
Grounding.
Grounding.
Grounding and fully occupying the body, right? Like
Right.
having a very, and we mentioned in the last episode, kind of not psychically overloading ourselves. So not becoming energetically too top heavy, meaning having a really strong physically embodied practice, cultivating your lower chakras, cultivating body awareness and embodiment, being on the earth, connecting with the earth, engaging with foods and with, with other aspects, 3D aspects that are really healthy and fulfilling, getting lots of good sleep, taking care of the physical body and processing it through the physical body.
Very important to be taking care of the physical body. Like a lot of times we get so psychically open and so sensitive that we're really overwhelmed by the energetics that are around us. And so it might feel like, oh my God, I have an entity. And really it's like the physical body is struggling. The physical body needs more minerals, more fats, more sleep, sometimes, a lot of times more meat, at least like root vegetables and things like that are going to ground and source the physical form.
Yes, absolutely. Next, I would say probably reviewing your internal architecture, I guess I want to say, like your belief structures and your emotional body structures and your agreements.
Agreements, right? Yeah. Like what, yeah, agreements I think is really important, that we don't think about that we've made agreements, and like, what are the agreements that you've made?
Right. Because looking at, again, we only have entities or attachments if we've agreed to it. And this is not, I want to underscore, this is not law of attraction shaming. That's one of my favorite terms to look at and you know what I mean, right? Where someone says, oh, your life sucks because you aren't doing X, Y, Z, or because you have whatever.
You called that in, right? You called that in, like you created that, all of that. Like, no, not exactly. Like you're not at fault.
Yeah.
If you're having a hard time, you're not necessarily at fault. And you're not doing enough affirmations or whatever.
Right. Or thinking positive. Yeah. That's not what I'm saying. I am not law of attraction shaming here, but I am saying according to the laws of earth, right? This is physics, people, the laws of earth, we all operate, for any energy wishing to engage with the earth plane, we operate under the laws of free will and sovereignty. So by that logic, it is only by your free will and your sovereignty, meaning AKA you agreeing to have an entity, that it is possible for an entity to come into your field. So again, it's not shaming, it's physics, but looking at your agreements and reviewing your agreements to see, okay, are they up to date? Are they healthy? Are they operating in a way that is really functional for your highest and greatest good? If you have an attachment, probably not. And so looking at, again, that internal architecture on the energetic, mental, emotional level to review and audit to be in order.
Right. And, we can make agreements in lots of ways, through engaging with our addictions, through engaging with rage, things that are of a very low vibrational frequency. So, like does attract alike. So there's something within us that's resonating within a likeness with whatever this is, which is like when we talked about before, it's really entity, no entity, questioning, who knows. It is always the invitation to look inward, to look at to look at patterns, to look at habits, to look at beliefs, to look at what's going on in you emotionally, energetically, physically, spiritually, on every level. And like we said in the last episode, this is the work that that people don't want to do. Like, we want to have something removed. We want to have an exorcism. And, sometimes you can do an exorcism on someone and release an entity, and they'll have an entity within a few months because they haven't changed any patterns, any habits, any ways of engaging with the world. They haven't shifted anything internally. So they're still the same person. They're just inviting the same stuff in. They haven't changed anything.
Mm-hmm. So either way, you're going to end up doing the work. There is no escaping it. Yeah. What other tools and techniques would we recommend to people?
Well, if you do have a trusted, amazing practitioner that you are, guided to contact and be, in space with, then you can receive a lot of help and a lot of guidance. And sometimes we're so in the middle of our own experience, we just need someone else to be in our experience with us.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always important. If you do feel like you are in crisis, that you're not alone, and that there are a lot of very skilled, valuable practitioners out there that can support you.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. AKA Catherine and myself and others. So things to look for. I want to just insert a couple notes. We did talk about this in our last episode as well, but looking for someone who can support you in working with not only just doing the exorcism and doing the clearing the attachment, but actually working on that the underlying programming and the underlying stuff, because otherwise you just need to go back and keep getting more exorcisms and it's not actually helping the problem.
What's the point? In the end, I think that if you have an entity, that having a spiritual mentor, more so even than necessarily, you might have like a healing shaman practitioner that you're going to help you with this, but someone that you would consider is actually giving you some spiritual mentorship as you go through the process, to be able to understand yourself better and to shift your consciousness and shift your thoughts and your beliefs and all of these things that we're talking about. Like that's the real work, and that's what's really important. And sometimes we can't do that on our own.
Well, and I want to put in one more note there, again, remembering that if we are operating under the perspective that everything that is coming into our field, ultimately for one or by one means or another, is working for our highest and greatest good, how do we then receive the gifts of an entity or an attachment or a psychic attack? We receive the gifts of that by alchemizing it, by again taking that really heavy, dense energy or potentially harmful energy and coming into mastery of it and transmuting it through this process where it ultimately becomes a gift and it becomes a component of our own grace. And so again, you get that by working with someone who can actually help you move through that process, not by someone who's just going to come in and zap you with some energy and quote fix you. So please consider that that to receive the true gifts of an experience like this, it is incredibly valuable to have a long-term relationship with a spiritual mentor, someone who can guide you through this ongoing process of development. And I want to come in alongside the psychic attack stuff, because we've touched upon that a couple times, and here let's look at some tools for dealing with psychic attack, because some of these are a little bit different. A lot of them are pretty much the same, but there's one or two nuances that would be helpful.
Yeah. Also when we're looking at things like there's lots of tools and techniques that we can be utilizing that help to, give us more protection or to cleanse and purify our space and so on and so forth. One of my teachers says that real protection, like if we run around trying to protect ourselves from everything, and that actually means that we are operating within the vibration that we need protection. And we don't actually need all that protection, but that if it's empowering you to engage in certain things that feel protective, then great. But that real protection is not allowing anything to collapse or distract your energy. So, right. So pulling you off center and being able to be grounded and source, like you talked in the last video about like how important it is that you can ground yourself, you can source energy from below and above, and you can move it through your body and your field so that you have that awareness of yourself, and you can fortify yourself with energy.
Right. And I want to steer people back to one of our, I don't even remember when it was maybe a couple of years ago, a much earlier episode. I think it was called Energetic Survival for Empaths, Healers, and Highly Sensitive People, where we taught these 4 keys of energetic regulation, essentially clearing, grounding, cultivation, and protection. And protection is, and this is something that I teach with my students in lightworker training and in one-on-one, where protection is the last piece. And ideally, where we have so much energy moving through these other practices, and we're so cultivated that, again, the protection is almost like an afterthought because it actually isn't necessary in the same way. So again,
right. And that oftentimes we're trying to protect the thing that we actually want to kill. So we're trying to protect our ego. We're trying to protect the parts of us that have the story and the identity, instead of being like, oh, wait a minute, let me look at myself and what actually am I trying to get rid of here? You know, the hate and the fear and the doubt and the shame and the self-judgment and the unworthiness, like all of those things. Like, am I trying to protect those things? Or am I willing to look at myself and be like, oh, the parts of me, right? The doubting, fearful parts of me that I'm trying to protect, I'd actually like to get rid of that. Like, what if life was more like, I'm not so doubtful and I'm not so fearful. Like, I'm just in awareness that I am safe and whole in every moment. Then that's a totally different way that we're engaging with the world, right?
Right. And it leaves us much less open to a psychic attack, right? Where and again, let's look here at the component of agreements. The same laws operate in this realm, where if we are under psychic attack, it's because we have agreed to that experience somehow. Again, it's not necessarily a conscious cognitive thing of saying like, okay, I'm agreeing for this person or this energy to be attacking me or siphoning off my vital life force energy. And we can look at attack as, I think, kind of our two broad areas of looking at attack are either like sending harmful energy or like vampirism, or some combination of those things, right? And again, just very speaking in broad brushstrokes here, but we have somehow agreed to that energetic connection that is formed through the attack. And when we are in our cultivation, when we are in our presence, when we are fully occupying our body, and we know how to relate in a healthy way to our energy field, we are so much less vulnerable to an attack, because we were able to discern what's ours and what's not ours. We're able to be resourced. We're able to be effective. We're able to be grounded. We're able to be fully embodied. And anyone or anything that then would try to either send us harmful energy or to draw from our life force, it simply wouldn't work. So really your best protection against psychic attack is actually not worrying at all about protection, but instead doing these other practices that we've been speaking about, meaning cultivating your identity and being embodied and having really resourced energy and having tools and practices to support your vitality and being in agreements that are really healthy.
Right. And clearing out the mess, right? Clearing out the energetic mess, clearing out the old emotions, the old energies that are stored in the system, the things that you haven't wanted to look at, like the stuff that's uncomfortable. And so it's because, like we said in the last, like an entity can be just an amazing distraction from the inner work that we're looking to do. So we have to always be coming back to what is the inner work that's being called for here. And if there is an entity, that might be something to look at. And within that, be curious, right? Just, I wonder. And, where is this in my body? Where is this in my energy field? And if I talk to it, what happens with that? What happens if I just have a conversation with it? What does it really want from me? What does it really want? And you might get something like, I want you to die. I want you to suffer. I want you to, you might get that. And your initial reaction might be like, there's something here. It wants to kill me. It wants me to die. Well, don't do that. Okay. Because it might want that, but that might not be actually what it really wants. What it really wants is to feel, but so you can ask, like, well, if I did die, if I was dead, like, how would you feel about that? How would that make you feel?
What would you get out of that?
Right. What would you get out of that? How would that make you feel?
For what purpose? This is something I teach to my alchemy students, and something we look at in parts integration. And it works in this case too, is essentially coming to, well, what is the core motive, the core desire? Where, you hear, for example, in this, in this line of investigation, let's just say, okay, you're tuning in to have a conversation with an entity and it says, I want you to die. And you say, okay, you want me to die for what purpose? And then it says, okay, I want you to die so that, you know, you can know what it's truly like to suffer. Okay, so that I can know what it's truly like to suffer for what purpose, right? You just continue this line of questioning until you come down to this thing where there's no other reason beyond that. And quite often the core reasoning is we look at how it gets warped way beyond comprehension to this, I want you to die, when actually the core purpose of this entity might just be, I want to be loved, for example.
Right.
Or
I want to feel powerful. Or I want,
to reconnect with God. I want to know who I am, which are not necessarily bad desires, not necessarily anything that we would, if we started there, we might look at like, oh, well, this thing isn't so bad. It actually, it has this desire, this operating system that I can look at and maybe agree with. And yet it's manifesting in this really twisted, unhealthy way.
Right. And so, it can be helpful to have somebody help guide you through that process of having that conversation, because it can feel intense at first.
It's really easy to stop after I want you to die. And then
you're like, enough, done. I'm done with that. Oh my God, it wants me to die. Like that's the end of the world. And because the thing is that oftentimes like entities don't actually want you to die, because then they're going to have to go find somebody else to bug. So a lot of times that's just to create mental and emotional suffering. And if you can get up underneath some stuff, then you'll have a better idea of what you're actually working with. Things are not what they seem most of the time. What you initially get the hit on is often like not actually the real thing. So it can take a little while to unwind these things and to understand them.
Mm-hmm. So I hope that's been helpful. We've covered a lot of ground. And before we're closing, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we want people to really need to know, take away from this. Anything, Kat?
Yeah, but I think also looking back at episodes, I think the one on mediumship, channeling, we did one on, like you said, the empath, energetic survival for empaths. We've also done
on energy vampires and toxic people.
Exactly. An energy vampires and toxic people podcast.
Protection and boundaries as well.
Protection and boundaries. We've done it all, people. So we have all the resources here for you to keep going into these different parts of what you need here. But, I think that my biggest takeaway here is there's something here to learn. There's something here to discover. There's something here to be in your own evolution around when this shows up. And to not let fear take over, and to allow your curiosity to emerge, and to, do some prayer and ask for help in whatever, ask for help on the physical and spiritual planes, to ask for support and guidance so that you can understand and alchemize this experience, and know that often through that process, then things will emerge. Maybe you did that and now you found this podcast and you're like, oh my gosh, really? Okay, now I know a few things. Yeah. Accept that you are very powerful. So if you're feeding this entity with your energy, you are giving it life force, you're giving it your energy. If you are finding ways to starve that entity, so that entity, if the entity's like, oh wow, that entity's super angry, I just get this energy of anger, it might be time to look at your own energy of anger. And how are you resonating with anger? How are you not okay with anger? How have you not expressed anger in the past? How do you go to anger as your number one thing? When you're feeling an emotion, it's always anger. And
it's was it the last episode, Kat, that you mentioned about changing the karmic address, right? So then if the food of this entity is anger, and we stop feeding it by instead cultivating compassion and love, then it might just leave on its own if we're no longer feeding it.
It doesn't have food.
Yeah.
And it might be an uncomfortable experience because it's like, it's like a little kid, right? If a little kid, you can think of your entity as a little kid, and a little kid is like super happy because you're giving it candy, and you're giving it candy, and you're giving it candy, and you're playing with it, and you're paying attention to it, and you're doing all the things that it loves. Every game that it loves, you're willing to play with it. You're willing to play the self-hatred game, and you're willing to play the misery game. You're willing to play the rage out game. You're willing to play all of these games with this little kid. And then if you start going, you know what? I'm not giving you candy, and I'm actually cultivating compassion. I'm cultivating inner peace. I'm cultivating higher awareness. That kid is going to lose its bananas and throw a tantrum and be on the floor and kicking and screaming and yelling and, you pay attention, poke, 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 poke. You suck. You're the worst. You're ugly. You're the worst. You're the worst.
So
Engage.
The entity, getting rid of an entity or changing your energy frequency is probably not going to be comfortable,
right?
And if there's, but you can do it, and it's okay, and there is a gift for you there. So I think if I could leave kind of one piece for people, if all of this, if you've listened to both of these episodes now and you're looking at, okay, what are the golden nuggets takeaways? Number one, you probably don't have an entity and no one is attacking you. But number two, if you do, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. You are not doomed. You are not forsaken to a life of having this entity and being under attack. You are not a victim. You are not, there's nothing wrong with you. But number three, this is an opportunity. Just as with any energetic frequency, any energetic invitation, this is an opportunity for you to step into a new way of being. And I feel very comfortable speaking for Katherine as well as myself. We invite you to take that opportunity, and we invite you to be present with the grace and with the mastery and the tools that you will grow into as a result. And again, it does not mean that there's anything wrong with you. It does not mean that you have failed at your energy field or that you can never come into a place of full empowerment. But it is, the grace that is there is really phenomenal. That's what I got.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. If you enjoyed this episode, please share with your community. Feel free to reach out to us and let us know how things are going for you. You can reach us at shamansistersessions.com or on Facebook. And like and comment and do all the things. Subscribe to our channels. You can see us on YouTube or listen on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. And yeah, just know that we're here with you, and you're not alone in any of these experiences or situations, and that there's a lot of support out there. And that, sometimes when we're dealing with spiritual stuff, it can be super confusing and scary, and you can feel alone, but really you're not actually. So
mm-hmm. And both Katherine and myself do work with people who are going through this process of investigation. So you're welcome to reach out to either or both of us individually. For people who are looking for, I mentioned the alchemy or alchemizing the energy or moving from lead to gold. If you're interested in learning more tools about alchemy, I am taking applications now for the 2020 year of I Am Alchemy course, which begins in March of 2020. So please reach out to me at joyofenergy.com. You can contact me through there. You can see the course details. You can send me an email if you're interested, and know that it's a year-long course in alchemical apprenticeship, and it is really powerful.
Great. And right now I'm moving, so I might have time for a little bit of one-on-one work. And the next thing I have going on will be early 2020 will be Open Your Channel. So if you are having experiences with beings and such and want to master that, then you can get on my list and learn more about that coming up.
You have a wait list for that, right? So even if people can't say yes.
I don't know how it's structured. I forget.
Okay. Kat has a wait list. So if you email her.
You can email me and be on the wait list. And if you're on the wait list, then you actually get a discount when we start.
There you go. Okay. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. And remember, you probably don't have an entity, but even if you do, everything's okay.
Bye.
Bye.